and make life a little bit easier for you, not only for you, but also for us at Elder Affairs. There's another question that came up in the series of questions that were shared with me from Betsy and all of you related to the annual report, and I will address that after Rachel provides her review of the new policy around the formula grant process. Again, I want to thank you for being here, for inviting us, for always being open, for being such extraordinary partners, and to continuing in providing your amazing support to so many of us who need us and don't have anyone other than the folks at Elder Affairs and all of you across the Aging Network within your own communities. Thank you again. And Betsy, I'll turn it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I want to welcome Rachel Goldstein, the Chief Financial Officer from Elder Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if you want to get into the questions first, if you'd like to read your brief first. That choice, Rachel, is yours.
Thanks so much, Betsy. And it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I don't think I've had the opportunity to meet many of you yet. So hopefully one day when we can all be back in one place, I'll get the opportunity to do that. But for now, just thank you to all of you and all the work that you do. Betsy, I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. And I think what I'd like to do is kind of just walk through the memo and just verbalize it a little bit, kind of provide some summary, reinforce the content that's in there. And then I will kind of walk through a few scenarios and we'll make sure to touch on the questions before we finish, if that's all right.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. And it goes without saying, Carol, please just jump in where you have things you want to add.
Okay.
All right.
Can I just point out for everyone who's calling in here, they're not going to see the screen, they can refer back to the memo that you issued if they'd like to follow along.
Absolutely. Thanks for that reminder, Betsy. Yes, everything that I am showing today, with one exception, was included in the email that I had sent out 2 weeks ago at this point, I think. And I will let you know when I'm getting to the document that was not included. So, and it's just an example. It's not anything that you need to change your practice. It's just an example. So the document that I've got up here, this is the memo that I distributed. And, this memo includes a few different things. One is that it talks about some really important policy changes that I think are really, exciting, in so much as, there's a lot that goes into this appropriation. There's a lot that goes into this, the contracts that result from it. And all of it is intended to kind of provide service with integrity and best practice. As we were going through this experience with COVID, as we were reflecting on some of our historical practices, we really felt that there was an opportunity to streamline the experience a bit for the councils on aging across the state. We felt that there was an opportunity to make it easier to obtain this money and make it easier to spend it in ways that are so needed on the local level. And so I think this change is really a good one. I'm going to walk us through the two different types of policy changes that we're making. And then I'm going to talk about the kind of fiscal year closeout activities that are happening right now as we speak. And I'll kind of provide some just illustration of how you should be using the documents that I provided to make sure that you've given us everything that we need to close out your FY20 contracts. And then, of course, I'll talk about the questions. So the first policy change that we discuss in this memo is about formula grants. So we give out formula grants based on kind of the U.S. Census information for each geographic area. And traditionally, there is a process that all of you, I think, know very well, where you are reporting to Elder Affairs on the total sum of money that you have left over that you didn't spend. And then there's a practice of us kind of offsetting your next year's contract award by that amount. That statement of, that final statement of final grant balance. The change that we're making here is that we're no longer going to ask you to report to us on how much you have left over from any individual contract. So, for example, this year, I think we sent out the contracts in probably November, October, sometime in that ballpark. Let's say that your Council on Aging got a $10,000 formula grant, but you only spent $8,000. In the old way, the old practice, the way that I think everyone's very used to doing this, we would obtain from you a document that says we have $2,000 left over. We didn't spend it. We weren't able to get to it. And then we would, as we were doing the next year's contract, reduce the next year's contract by that sum of money. We will no longer be doing that. Starting with the next round of contracts, we will no longer be asking you to tell us how much you did not spend, and we will no longer be reducing the next year's contract by that amount. So when we do our budget allocations, if we award your Council on Aging a $10,000 formula grant contract, you're going to get a $10,000 formula grant contract. We will no longer be offsetting that in any way based on previous expenditure activity. So, like I said, the historical processes were driven with integrity and purpose and mission. I think that this shift is going to lift some administrative burden and will kind of more closely align the way that we treat this funding with some of the other types of local aid that you receive. So again, you will no longer need to submit that final statement of grant balance, and we will no longer reduce the next year's contract award by your grant balance amount. It means that we're going to be pushing out more money to our partners at Councils on Aging. So I got a lot of questions about this. And so I just want to clarify that typically at some point over the next 1 to 2 months, you would be going through this process, right? Under the old way, you would be filling out that statement of grant balance, you would be sending it in. You no longer have to do that. So when we are able to distribute our contracts, we will do so without asking you how much you spent from this past year. All right. Carol, Dave, Betsy, anything you would add to that before I move on to the legislative earmarks?
No, I think that was very clear. Thank you.
Okay, great. So for the legislative earmarks, I got a few questions asking, I don't know if I have a legislative earmark. How do I know that? You would know that you have a legislative earmark because in the General Appropriations Act, under Appropriation 9110-9002, and after the first kind of sentence or two, there'd be a special call out for you. You would have, this legislation appropriates $50,000 to the Boston Council on Aging for a new roof. You would have a special call out in the law dedicating money to your organization, and it would tell you what it was for. So that's how you know if you have a legislative earmark. This account gets many legislative earmarks, and so this is a very common type of contract that we do. And in the past, kind of historically, we would require the Councils on Aging who received a legislative earmark would submit documentation to us telling us what they spent it on and telling us that they had actually expended the money. And we would reimburse up to the total earmark amount for eligible expenses that Council on Aging had incurred. So it was a reimbursement. We didn't just distribute all of the money. Under the new policy, this will feel similar to what we just talked about on the formula grant. under this new policy for the legislative earmarks, we will no longer be asking for documentation of actual expenditures to distribute the entire earmark amount. So a lot of our legislative earmark recipients this year really felt this, and it was, I think, very stressful for everybody, because a lot of these earmarks go for things like capital projects. They go for things that require you to be open. And we had to shift our entire way of doing business this year, right? We weren't in our facilities. We weren't able to put on the new roof or replace the boiler or whatever the project was that you needed to do. And that shift really triggered us to think about how we're distributing these legislative earmarks. We want to be pushing, and the law says we need to be pushing this money out in full to the recipients. And so starting right now, today, any earmark that's active from FY20, so the fiscal year that started on June 1st, 2019, and ended on June 30th, 2020, any earmark that was distributed during FY20, we will be paying it out in full, right? And so that's the policy change. We will be keeping this practice moving forward for all future fiscal years. So next year, the year after, as legislative earmarks are coming out, you will no longer need to send us the bill for the contractor that replaced your roof and the bill for the rental company for this other thing that you needed to do. You will complete the contract as you always do. You will let us, you'll fill out the invoice template and you'll send it all in at once, and we'll distribute the earmark. And so this is, again, kind of taking away some of the administrative burden that has existed, again, with integrity and mission and purpose in the past. And so we're going to be shifting some of those administrative processes. So as a reminder, when we distribute any of this money, we're always doing so based on the law, right? The law is always describing the purpose of the money. And even though we're not going to ask for the proof of documentation of your roof repair, of your boiler repair, of your new sidewalk, whatever it may be, it's still the Council on Aging's responsibility to be spending the money in compliance with the law. And you need to maintain the kind of documentation that would support appropriate spending in the event of an audit. So just because we're not asking you for it when we go to pay your invoices doesn't mean that you don't have to comply with those requirements. All we're doing is we're making the administrative process easier to get the money out. You still need to implement any legislative earmark in compliance with how it's written in the law, and you still need to spend formula grant money kind of in the best interest of councils on aging. I'm going to pause here for a moment, just ask Carol, Dave, Betsy, if you have anything you want to add on the legislative earmark component. Okay.
Nope.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to shift gears now. Those were two big policy changes. Those are things that I think are going to be really beneficial, and we're excited about, and I hope that you all are too. I'm going to switch gears, and now I'm going to talk about the immediate needs that we have to close out FY20. So there were two kind of potential actions that any grants, any Council on Aging may need to take. And they were all contingent on whether you had already received everything that was in your contract, right? So the first piece was around earmark contract balances. So I'm going to pull up the document that I sent out, and I'm going to show you what everyone needs to do. So this document has a list of all of the legislative earmarks that we've given out. It has the name of your organization, how much your award was for, and how much you've spent. And this is I haven't updated this since I last sent it out, so this may have shifted. But what I would do is, if I was the town of Dracut, I would pull this list up and I would zoom down and I would find my name and I would scroll over to the right and say, yep, there's my $100,000 earmark, all set, this is good. And then I would scroll over and I would see that I have $100,000 that I haven't been paid for yet. That is what should tell you that you've got something you need to do with us, right? If your balance is zero, you're all set, you're good. But if you've got money listed in this yellow column, then you need to do something. And what you need to do is you need to fill out this document. For the folks who are just on the phone, I am pulling up an example. It's just the one that happened to be on the top of my email. This is an example of what an earmark invoice looks like. You need to fill out an earmark invoice for the balance of your grant and send it to my colleague Stacey O'Connell and to me. This is what we need to pay you. So if you've got a balance left, which you'll see because there'll be a positive number in this yellow cell on attachment 1 that says earmark contract balance. If you've got a positive number there, that says you've got money sitting in your contract and we need to pay you for it. So you need to fill out the invoice that I just mentioned, put it, for the requested amount, it should be the entire balance, everything that's left on your contract. Send this to me and to Stacey. We'll process it and we'll pay you. And then that will be the end. So this is just for legislative earmark recipients. Again, that's when you've got the special call out in the General Appropriations Act. That's what it means to be a legislative earmark recipient. Any questions? Well, actually, you can't ask me questions, but David or Betsy or Carol, anything you would want to add before I just quickly demonstrate the formula grant equivalent to this?
Nope, I think we have all the questions that have been submitted that we can go through after.
Perfect. Okay. So the second thing that you need to do is that for your formula grant, which everybody should have, right? For your formula grant, you need to do the same exercise. You need to pull up the attachment 2 that says formula grant contract balances. You need to find your name. So let's just take the first one I see. If I'm the town of Beckett, I'm going to find myself on the list. I'm going to see that I've got a $3,500 grant contract award. I'm going to see that I haven't received any money from it yet, and that I've got a $3,500 balance. Now, the only reason that we wouldn't have paid out this contract at this point in the year is because we don't have the contract. It was never fully executed. And so in the memo, I provide a link that you can click on and go to find your contract document, right? So I'm going to click on it. And it's loading. And so the way that they prepare these contract documents is that they're all, you'll see there's 344 pages to this. It's because everyone's contract is one page and it all lives in one document, right? So
Scroll.
I'm going to find the town of Beckett. This is what it looks like. I will print out this page. I will find the person who's authorized to sign a contract on my behalf. I will have them sign it. Extremely important. They must sign it with a wet signature. Extremely important. If we get a contract without a wet signature, we can't process it. I promise it's not us being difficult. The comptroller literally won't accept it and we won't be able to pay you. So it must be signed with a wet signature. A human has to sign it, and the date must be handwritten as well. If you send us a contract with a typed in date, again, they won't accept it and we won't be able to pay you. Once I print it, I sign it. I think you have to send in 2 copies, scan it to us, put it in the mail. As soon as we get it, I will sign it. Our Director of Contracts and Accounting will sign it, and we will get it processed and we will pay you. right? This is just for formula grants. And again, this is only because at this point in the year, the only reason we wouldn't have paid out a contract in full is because we don't have a contract. So that's why you need to go through this process. The vast majority of councils on aging are all set and don't need to do this. Very few of the councils on aging don't have an executed contract. So this is the exception. But this is what you need to do if when you pull up this attachment 2 and you see that you've got money in this yellow cell, that's the process you need to go through. And it's just so we can pay you. So that's my whole demonstration, live exhibit of what it takes to get paid out for this in full. So at this point, I am happy to kind of run through the questions. Carol, it might be a good idea for you to proactively take the questions about the annual report, because I think that comes up a number of times through this. So why don't we just proactively get that one off the list first?
Absolutely. Betsy, do you want to read it, or do you want me to just address the annual report?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions regarding this. So why don't I go through each one? I'll pull them out. So the first question is, do you have any idea when the FY 2021 annual report is coming out?
Okay. So let me just provide some context to annual report. So the annual report is issued every year around September, October. You typically would receive an email from Emmett Schmarzow, and it would be a form asking you to complete to describe activities you're providing, number of consumers you're serving, duplicated and unduplicated, costs associated with a number of items, etc. And then you would email that annual report back to Emmett. Elder Affairs uses it as a guide to better understand the work and the services and supports that are provided on the daily at all of the councils on aging across the Commonwealth. And it also helps us better understand how the funding is being utilized. The annual report is not tied to or contingent upon any municipality from receiving a formula grant. As Rachel just described, the formula grant will be issued very much like other local aid funding that you receive in your municipality. With that said, the annual report, again, will be issued via email. You will receive an email in mid-September or so. The annual report form will be attached to the email. It will describe in that email what you need to complete, and it will give you some time to complete it and then email it back to Emmett. It should be very clear and straightforward. So that's going to happen sometime around mid-September. And typically we provide you with 4 weeks or so to complete and then email it back to Emmett. And we keep that information on record, on hand, again, to better understand the activities at the local level, at the COAs and senior centers. There is nothing you need to do now, but for those who are most familiar with the annual report, you already have this information in place. For those of you who use My Senior Center, for an example, all of this very much similar information is in the My Senior Center database that are also questions within the annual report. It's just one central way for Elder Affairs to gather the same information across all of the councils on aging. And today it is done and will continue to be issued via email, and it will come from Emmett Schmarzow, as I said, sometime in September, second week or so, and we'll give you about a month or so to complete. If there are any questions after today that come up about the annual report or what you need to do, please don't hesitate to call me directly, Carol Malone. You can contact Emmett Schmarzow or Adam Frank. Don't hesitate at all to reach out to any one of us. but you should breathe a little bit and not worry about that today on August 20th. You need to be doing something with the annual report because you do not. We haven't issued it yet. So expect to see that in your inbox, in your email, mid-September or so. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol. And maybe this will be easier if you want to go through those and answer those questions relative to the annual report. I think the next one is also asking whether or not 2 different reports would be required, but I think you can clarify that for us.
No, it's one report. It's an annual report. Just one report will be required. And again, it will be sent out electronically. It's pretty straightforward. The document itself has not changed for many years. And
Right.
if you have any questions after you receive it, just send back that question to me.
Great. Because that particular question was someone had submitted, since we had closed down in mid-March, would we be required to submit 2 reports? But to clarify that, that's not correct. It's the 1 report. Okay.
That's correct.
Do you want to move on to the next question regarding the reports?
Sure. I don't have it in front of me, Betsy, so if you don't mind.
Sure. No problem.
Usually.
I actually think this has to do more with the formula grant with balances. I'm going to. So further down, I have, will EOEA be requiring us to submit the following documents? And if so, when will we receive the information on when it's due? That's the statement of authorization, the annual report form, EOEA, SGA, and attachment B budget.
So EOEA, as Rachel described, the only things that you will need to do for the formula grant is exactly as she described. You will not be submitting a statement of authorization. You will not be submitting, I forget what the next one was, Betsy?
The annual report form, EOEA, SGA.
Okay, no, there will not be an annual report SGA. There will be the annual report that will go out in September.
Correct.
Separate from the formula grant process, but you have not, no one has received that yet.
Yep. And the last document was the attachment B budget.
No, you do not submit an attachment B budget.
And the next question in regards to reporting is, and you can just repeat yourself if you'd like, please clarify what's required for the FY20 and FY21 reporting.
The document, anything that's required to report to Elder Affairs for FY20 or FY21 will be in the annual report, and that document will go out to the network in mid-September or so. It's very straightforward, as I said. There are some basic questions about the number of folks you serve, unduplicated counts, what types of services and supports you provide, and then that will be emailed back to Emmett, and there will be a date in the email, in the instruction, when you need to return it.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Sure.
I want to make sure that, again, I really appreciate the work that Elder Affairs has done. This is fantastic. This is great news. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding it as a social worker, and make sure that I'm on board. So in the document Rachel has sent out, there were 2 attachments, one of which were people who did the formula grant who have not signed a contract yet. If you have a balance in the yellow, it's for lack of a contract. Get it, get the contract signed and get it returned so you can get your FY20 funding complete. Mm-hmm. Other than that, there's nothing left to do for FY20 other than an annual report that will be sent to you mid-September. I basically have FY20 completed on formula grant?
That's correct.
Okay, then on the earmarks, again, under GAA, if you look at the budget of last year that the governor signed, there were $2 million worth of earmarks. And as Rachel pointed out, for heating systems, roofs, refrigerators, etc. Those $2 million, most have been expended and gone. but the second attachment that Rachel sent lists those earmarks. If you have a balance, there's a simple form that you go in and just complete the balance. You do not need to have the documentation or the backup for that to send to Rachel, but you need to send in that other form. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. And I would refine that page a little bit just to say that you don't need to have expended the money to submit an invoice, which is a little different than just not needing to provide documentation of it.
Yep.
If you weren't able to finish the roof because you had just shut down for COVID and so you've got $20,000 left on your earmark, you will get paid for the $20,000 for the roof, even though you didn't spend it yet. So not only is it no documentation of actual expenditures, but you don't need to have incurred the expense yet. However, you have to follow the law and you need to spend the money on the roof or whatever it was appropriated for when you're able to do so.
So your local town city auditors are going to want to see your documentation on that expenditure for the roof that Rachel was just talking about. You might not have been able because of COVID to get it done by August 20th, but when you get it done, make sure you have that documentation and that balance equals or exceeds the allocation that you were given. You are going to need to fully fund that money, but the documentation is an internal town municipality document that you'll need to share with your auditors because they'll be all over you on this.
Right.
Okay. So then you move down to the annual report. As Carol's pointed out, it's not coming out until September 15th. There will only be one annual report for the entire year. There is not going to be the pre and post COVID concept of it. If you want to delineate that within the report, you can put a footnote in, but there's not going to be two separate reports. There is going to be no reconciliation document or what we call the statement of authorization. That is no longer part of this process. And there will be no budget submitted on how you're going to fund FY21 formula grant.
Correct.
Now, one thing that if I could just intervene, Carol, and get that clarified a little bit further, in the budget for the formula grant, do we have to spend the money in accord? I can't go to Bermuda with it. So are the guidelines that have been established that are in the old book that Emmett put out, they still are in effect, and that when my auditor takes a look at how I spent that funding, that's what it has to be funded against, correct?
I would say yes, and Rachel, I can see you want to add to that, and I would just reiterate what Rachel said is this funding issued through the line item, the COA account in the final GAA, and to the letter of the law requires the municipality to spend those dollars on services and supports for the older adults within the community. So we are no longer asking the councils to, how do I say this, validate with Elder Affairs each expense that you're using those dollars on, as long as they are following the letter of the law. And it's in your best interest to do that for auditing purposes down the road, either locally or by the state. But Rachel may want to add to that.
No, I think that was perfect. Follow the law, spend the money the way it was defined in the General Appropriations Act. You should be spending it on items or services that are consistent with your mission as a Council on Aging, and you should be spending it in accordance with your municipal finance requirements. So you're exactly right, Dave. You cannot take it and go to Bermuda, but you can spend it on things that are consistent with your mission and your local finance requirements.
And
response.
the serious response to that I didn't mean to be too jovial about going to Bermuda, but the serious response is the municipality can't take that money and spend it on schools.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's clear in our network as well, that just because the municipality is going to be getting that check, they can't say, oh, well, let's go spend it over here. It's got to be spent on the older adults in that community.
So, and David, that you raise a very good point, and I know you're referring to the Green Guide, and over the years, municipalities or COAs would contact Emmett and say, I would like to spend, if they were unsure about an expense, they would call and have a conversation with Emmett and say, I would like to spend formula grant on X. And if it was not something that was clearly defined in this guide that he has created over the years, a conversation would be had internally, and it would be viewed at and looked at, is this an appropriate expense and an appropriate use of formula grant dollars to benefit an older adult in the community? If we could say yes to that, we would say yes, of course. Now, my expectation, and this is for all who are on the phone, is that there are still going to be questions about that. I would welcome those questions. If you are still unsure, even though we are not seeking that from you in any formal sense, we are not saying, here's the list, spend it on these things only. But I think just as we all become more acclimated with this process, you may have questions at the local level that say, I'm not sure I can utilize these funds in this manner. I'm going to check with Elder Affairs. That's perfectly appropriate to still make that call to us. Does that make sense? Okay.
Now, just to take that a little bit further, and Betsy, sorry to jump in here. I'm looking specifically at question number 9. With the new changes, are we going to have to stick to the present policies such as $37.50 maximum for paying for instructors? You know, there's some volunteer language in there as well. Are those limits guidelines, or can, if I have to buy an instructor to do a Tai Chi class that costs me more than $37.50, is that a local determination?
That's a local determination at the discretion of the municipality. That's an excellent example. I'm glad you raised it. This is an area as well that over the years, Emmett has accumulated best practices and guidances from across the COA network and put them together in this document to provide technical assistance, so to speak, to the community to give folks a sense of what's should I spend, how much should I spend or not spend? What makes sense? What will the market bear? But honestly, these are dollars fit right into that bucket of local aid. Each municipality is unique and different. You know your own individual budgets. Formula grant is a small piece of your overall budget. So as you're looking at formula grant, along with the other funds that you have at the local level, when you're making a determination about how much to spend, it is something that has to be determined at that level. Again, don't feel uncomfortable calling Elder Affairs to look for guidance.
Just as a follow-up now. So I have a balance in my formula grant of $2,500 that's been highlighted by Rachel in the yellow column. I still can go ahead and spend that money even though fiscal year 20 has closed, as long as I'm spending it in accordance with the guidelines, the discussion you just had about that it needs to be in service for older adults in your community. Is that correct? Correct,
100% correct.
So if I don't get around to spending that until November, is that a problem? Is there a timeline on this? Is this going to be 3 years out? I still have $2,500 left over? Or how do you handle that? Or is that something the local auditor will help provide the guidelines on?
So I'm going to jump in. That's something that you should be consulting with your local finance staff about. So from Elder Affairs perspective, we're going to pay out your entire formula grant. You will have that cash on hand, right? We will have paid it out. Now, each municipality, I would presume, has their established processes for how revenue gets recorded and how you can roll it over and the kind of accounts that you need to in order to do that. So from Elder Affairs perspective, we will have paid out your whole formula grant. You have the entire amount sitting in your bank account. From our perspective, we're done. You know, we're of course engaging all the time from a programmatic point of view, but we will have paid out the contract. It's your money now. You need to engage with your local finance staff to plan for how you're going to be using that money and the support that you need from the finance team to make that possible. So from Elder Affairs perspective, we will have paid out the contract. It's yours now. You need to be engaging with your local team to set up your accounting, make sure that the funding will be available for you for when you're planning on spending it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So we tried to go through the rest of these questions, some of which have been answered, but I want everyone who submitted them that are on the call to know that these have been addressed and answered. So I believe that pretty much covers the reporting piece. So if we're going to shift more back towards the formula grant, Rachel, we had a question that said,
Betsy,
well,
I can just run through this real quick and just
great.
answer these
Great.
that I feel like haven't been
Okay.
answered.
Wonderful.
Number
Thank
one,
you.
do you have any idea when the FY21 formula grant, any idea what the FY21 formula grant will look like and when that form will be sent out? So since we're still operating under an interim budget, we are working through the kind of budget development process for the FY21 grant amount. I don't have any information I can share with you today on exactly what that budget methodology is going to look like. Of course, it's still going to pull from the census data that we always use. We're just working through some of the mechanics of exactly kind of what we're able to give out right now and the cash flow components. So more to come on that piece. But I know that folks are anxiously awaiting that information, so we will be getting it out just as soon as we possibly can. We talked about number 2, the annual report. Talked about number 3. We already talked about the fact that you can roll it over. You can roll over unspent formula or legislative earmark funding, but you need to be coordinating with your local finance staff to make sure that your accounts are set up properly to enable you to do that. Number 5, this is about some of the reporting. So I'm not going to answer that. We already talked about that one. Someone asked what will be required on the application for the formula grant. So you don't have to apply for a formula grant. We will contact you when we have the final budget allocations, and we'll give you the contract document that you need to sign. So from your perspective, lay back and wait till you hear from us. And when you do hear from us, all you need to do is sign the contract and send it back. So it is a light lift. We talked about some of the best practices that Emmett records. Someone said, while it is clear we won't have to submit the contract balance statement forms for 21, is the state requiring contract balance statements to be submitted for 20? No. Please let us know how the grant balance is to be handled. Is it due on August 14th? So the deadlines that we gave you, there are 2 deadlines. One is for if you had a formula grant balance and you needed to give us a contract. If you had a balance in that yellow cell that was greater than 0, we need you, if you haven't already submitted your contract document, I need it urgently, so that we can get it processed. That's all that was talking about, was submitting the contract if you haven't already done it. The other deadline for the legislative earmarks is just to give us your invoice for the balance of your grant. And that, I believe, due tomorrow. So that's the distinction there. Someone said, as it is written, this appears to be indefinite. Am I correct to understand that unless a different memo is sent out in the future, the practice of providing final grant balance is to be discontinued? Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
We are, unless additional information comes out saying something is changing, this is forevermore shall be. Some of these are a little long, so give me just one moment. If money is allocated at the beginning of the year for an approved line item within the grant, which by the end of the year falls short of the budget, can it be utilized for any allowed expense within, yeah, we talked about this. You can repurpose, once we distribute the funding, you can repurpose it across kind of intended budget categories consistent with the GAA, consistent with the local finance law, consistent with the mission of Grants to Councils on Aging and Serving Older Adults. All right. I think we covered everything. Carol, Dave, Betsy, is there anything else you'd like me to speak to?
I think you've answered all of those questions. And I think we have one other question that really isn't related to formula grant, Carol, so I don't know if you want to tackle this one, but someone had written in that their center is currently closed to the public and all of their staff report to the building and execute takeout or take home kits, cable and phone-based programs, and drive-through events and outside fitness classes. But their center has no ventilation system. And that they're finding that this is a hurdle that's preventing them from opening back up even for reduced programming. And they're asking if there are any capital grants that you may be aware of that may help senior centers address clear air exchange issues.
I can get back to you on that. I don't know off the top of my head, but definitely can look into that.
Great.
The only other thing I'll reference on that is I know earlier on during the pandemic, I think it was April or May, the governor issued CARES Act funding to address pandemic-related issues to all municipalities, and I know those funds need to be expended by the end of September. I would not be surprised if there are municipalities that have not spent down all of their funds or may be looking for those purposes to spend. So I strongly urge COA directors, if there are issues that or expenses that you have incurred during this period of time, even if it does not seem obvious, to make your case to your executive authority about those dollars, those federal dollars that were made available to your municipality specifically for the purposes to address those additional expenses, unforeseen expenses that you incurred as a result of the pandemic. I personally, and even professionally, based on this description that you just described to me and from reading through these documents, view this as one of those areas that could potentially receive funding. So I would strongly encourage you to check that with your executive authority.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have anything to add, David.
No, I just was going to thank once more our friends at Elder Affairs. Rachel and Carol, this is fantastic. This is great news. This last month, if you remember, we talked about the fact that Elder Affairs was able to help us identify funding to pay for all MCOA dues for FY21. We now have put these new policies in place, new procedures in place that will lighten the load, will allow you more flexibility locally. And again, this is extraordinary. I've been in this job now 27 years, and this is the happiest day I've had in all of them, even though we're in the midst of this ugly pandemic. So thank you to Carol, to Rachel, to Elizabeth. This is extraordinarily good news. It creates not only less work, but a lot more flexibility on the local level, which is what this is. Local aid should be determined. That is not to say that that money can be diverted to some other purpose. It needs to be funded to help older adults in your community. My only other concern with this particular issue is that we're going to lose the ability to understand what you are funding that, using that funds for. So when we make the case to the legislature to go to $12, to go to $15, whatever, we're not going to have that information through Emmett and Adam and Carol. We're going to need to come back to you and to collect that information. And by doing that, again, you report this out to your town anyway, but by filling out the UMass surveys that Kathy Bowler has been leading and championing with that team, that will help us with our advocacy efforts. So again, it shifts from the annual reports and from the application process. It'll start shifting some of that to the survey. We'll still collect some information from Elder Affairs, but we're going to need more from you by completing out the UMass surveys. Rachel, you're wonderful. You can take tomorrow off.
Well, I would be nothing without my colleagues at Elder Affairs, so thank you for everyone's partnership.
I have a few more things to say, but Rachel, I know you need to sign off, so if you need to, go ahead. But I wanted
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. Have a good one.
Again, I wanted to circle back and just, finish my thoughts about the movement. Again, it's hard in the middle of this pandemic. It is hard when we know friends and family and neighbors and residents and constituents have passed. It is hard when we cannot get together. We are all proponents, by virtue of working in the senior center movement, of what's called the engagement theory. I've talked about this in the past, but we know that when older adults stay engaged as they age, they stay better, healthier, and more economically secure. So it is very difficult for those of us who are proponents of the engagement theory to sit home and wonder what is happening with the 2,000 or 3,000 older adults in our community that might be isolated. MCOA is going to continue to work on that with AARP, with the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and other players as we try to identify how we can expand beyond our online consumer education programs, how we can work towards identifying activities that can go on at the senior center. With that, we're going to need your help. All of you are experts in the field. If you've been handed the keys and you're opening the door to a senior center and you are trying to start a transportation program, or let me phrase that better, trying to restart a transportation program, or to evolve a Zumba class, or to change and upgrade a tax work-off program, or we're going to need you to describe to us the challenges that you faced and how you overcome them, the ones that might still be out there that you haven't resolved, so we can circulate these as best practices and common think. We want people in our network to join in these discussions. Right now we have, not only this forum, but we've been having the regional meetings that have been going on where there's been a lot of information sharing. But the staff on Monday decided we're going to upgrade this once more and we're going to evolve ourselves. We are, starting in September, going to be developing community conversation forums for COAs. They will be short, 30 to 45 minutes on Zoom, where COAs can share ideas and problem solve in small group settings to maximize participation. The conversations will be topic specific and offered to networks on 3 or 4 different times and dates over a 30-day period. The summary of the information will be shared in the network after all groups for the topics that have been met. So in September, we will begin these small group discussions. So watch for the dates. We will be talking about different issues in September on the property tax work-off program, innovative strategies on how that is to be implemented in this year of COVID. And then we are going to be tackling other issues and other programs that have arisen in our network. And again, we see this as another level of communication that you'll be able to crowdsource, crowd share your problems, your concerns, your challenges, and hopefully our peer network will be able to provide you those particular solutions and answers that will help you provide a better quality programming or answer the questions you've defined. So these are going to be coming in September. We'll be announcing those in the briefs, so stay tuned to the briefs. But again, we are trying to be able to meet your needs. As other needs that might come up, it's, hey, I don't know how to handle this, or could you think about something along this line? Get it to us, send it to coronavirus, send it to Betsy, or myself, we are here to meet your needs as a state association. We have to not only provide the services to 1.7 million older adults, but we have to learn how to provide them in a new way. And this is all being done one day at a time as we adapt, restore, and evolve. I'm going to turn it back to Carol and to Betsy for final thoughts. And then I have one closing statement that I wanted to make. Carol or Betsy?
Thank you, David. I really hope today's review of the new policy on formula grant and the earmarks and all the different forms and reports and paperwork that you've all been doing for so many years, I hope this review was helpful. I do expect questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly or to Emmett or Adam. No question is ridiculous or silly or it doesn't make sense. All questions are welcome. This is new, and even though it's simpler and we feel like this is great and going to be much easier for you as a municipality, for us as a network, for us at Elder Affairs as well, it's still a change. And I know there are a lot of new folks out there too, so please don't hesitate to reach out. I am looking forward to making life easier for all of you as well as us at Elder Affairs. There's no reason why any of this needs to be hard. You are doing incredible work in providing services and supports to older adults who need you most, especially during this extraordinary time. We want to make sure that there are systems in place that can help you to do and meet your work and meet those challenges, as they are quite difficult to figure out. I empower you all in sending you lots of good vibes as you work with your executive authorities to make your case about how important the COAs are to older adults in the municipalities across the communities, and that you are a vital, essential service within your local budgets. So go get them. And thank you again. It's always a pleasure to be on these calls and to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. The only thing I want to add is just again to remind everyone to mark their calendars for the next monthly meeting call with Elder Affairs, Thursday, September 24th at 2 p.m. David, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
I just want to let you all, or make you all aware, that I will be on medical leave for the next several weeks. I'm finally getting my knee done, and I will be out of commission for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on my recovery time. Betsy, our assistant director, will be acting in my place. I am thrilled that she is on staff to be able to handle this. And then our board president, Becky Moriarty, will be stepping in as well to help out wherever is needed. But thank you all for some of the preliminary best wishes. And I hope to be back at this time. And the next monthly meeting, I hope I'm back among the resurface, if you will. But if you have any questions or concerns, please send them directly to Betsy and or Becky. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for a tremendous day, and thanks our friends at Elder Affairs for great news.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. This MCOA event is now concluded and the recording device is now being turned off. Participants, we thank you for joining us today.